The glass doors of the Atlanta Country Club eased open, letting in a soft current of warm evening air. Conversations quieted almost instantly. Heads turned. Some guests paused mid-sip. Others leaned toward their friends with that familiar hush of gossip ready to burst. Julie stepped inside. The glow from the chandeliers touched her shoulders, but what truly drew attention was the man. Beside her, Malcolm, steady and calm, holding her hand as if protecting something precious. The room wasn't expecting her. Not here, not at Rick's celebration. A whisper cut through the silence, sharp enough for her to hear. Isn't that the ex-wife they judged unfit? It wasn't the words that stung. It was the memory they carried. Julie kept her shoulders square, chin lifted. She wasn't the trembling young woman who once walked out of a courthouse with empty arms. She had survived heartbreak that nearly crushed her. She had rebuilt her life with prayer, strength, and a man who stood beside her without hesitation. Still, walking into that room felt like stepping onto a stage she never asked for. Malcolm gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "You're not facing this alone," he murmured. Julie exhaled slowly, grounding herself before lifting her eyes, only to find Rick staring straight at her from across the room. His expression froze, stopping whatever polite smile he'd been offering the guests. The tuxedo, the polished shoes, the carefully arranged decor behind him. None of it hid the shock in his face. For a moment, time didn't move. Julie had expected discomfort. She had prepared for awkward greetings, but she hadn't prepared for the way Rick looked at her. Like her presence carried a truth he'd never quite escaped. She held his gaze, steady and calm, refusing to shrink. Not tonight. This was only the beginning. Rick tried to recover his expression, smoothing his jacket and offering quick nods to guests who whispered around him. But his eyes kept pulling back to Julie, as if her presence unsettled something deep inside him. He excused himself from a conversation with a board member and stepped toward the hallway near the catering staff. One of his assistants was waiting there, holding a beige envelope with both hands, face pale and nervous. "Sir, the results came back faster than expected." Her voice shook. Rick took the envelope, confusion settling in. "Right now?" he whispered. She nodded. "You said to bring it the moment it arrived." He stepped into a quiet corner, away from the music and chatter. Julie watched from across the room, not knowing why he looked so tense, but feeling a shift, the kind that changes the air in a crowd without warning. Rick opened the envelope. His fingers stopped moving. His breath halted. His face drained of color. One sentence sat in the center of the page, cold and final. Probability of paternity, 0%. The baby he and Vanessa were celebrating, the baby shower filling the room, with laughter, gift bags and congratulatory handshakes, was not his child. He steadied himself against the wall, the paper trembling between his fingers. The life he built, the image he protected, the judgments he once placed on Julie. Everything cracked at once. Hurt didn't just sit in his chest. It tore through him like something that refused to be ignored. Rick squeezed his eyes shut, struggling to breathe, struggling to understand how this moment became his reality. The crowd remained unaware, but his world had already broken apart. When he finally lifted his head, overwhelmed and shaken, his gaze drifted back toward the ballroom. To Julie, the woman he once called unfit. The only person in that entire room who knew what it felt like to lose a child because of someone else's choices. Her eyes met his again. She didn't know yet, but somehow, the quiet sympathy in her face, the same soft strength she carried even, after everything he took from her, struck him harder than the sentence on that paper. For the first time in years, Rick felt exactly what she once felt. And Julie simply stood there, steady and whole. Before the baby shower games began, before another flute of champagne touched, the tables, the air inside that glittering country club shifted. Not because the room noticed Rick's collapse in the hallway, but because you, the viewer, know what moments like this feel like. Not the wealth, not the chandeliers, not the gowns and tailored suits, but the feeling of being judged without a chance to defend yourself. As Julie stood near the entrance with Malcolm, she felt dozens of quiet opinions brushing against her like unwelcome drafts. Some guests tilted their heads. Others leaned closer to whisper behind manicured hands. They didn't know her story, but they acted as if they did. "Bestie, let me ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly in the comments later. Have you ever been judged by people who never knew your heart? Have you ever carried a truth inside you while the world confidently spoke lies about you? Have you ever been blamed for something you didn't do, only to watch truth walk right back into the room years later?" That's what this moment held for Julie. These weren't strangers. They were people who once nodded along when Rick's family painted her as incapable, irresponsible, unworthy. People who took whispers and treated them as fact. People who thought her background made her less of a mother. Yet here she stood, stronger, steadier, filled with a calm she didn't have back then. Their judgment didn't define her anymore. Their opinions no longer shaped her future. But their presence? Their murmurs? The way some guests stared as if she didn't belong? It reminded every viewer of something universal. The world can misjudge you. People can misunderstand your heart. Lies can spread faster than truth. But time has a way of revealing character. And tonight, in this very room, the truth was already cracking beneath polished surfaces. Julie didn't know it yet, but a storm had already hit Rick's life moments earlier. The same man who once stood with the power to take her child was now standing in the hallway with nothing to hold on to, but a piece of paper proving his life wasn't what he thought. "So, bestie, let me ask you again, not as a storyteller, but as someone who understands life. Have you ever been blamed and later watched the truth return on its own?" Tonight, Julie was about to experience that moment. Julie hadn't come to the baby shower to prove anything. She didn't walk into that room hoping to impress the people who once treated her like she didn't deserve to be a mother. She only came because somewhere in that building was a little boy she had once rocked to sleep, her son, her first heartbreak, her quiet prayer. But the problem wasn't just old memories resurfacing. The deeper issue was the lie that followed her for years. Society labeled her unfit, not because she lacked love, not because she lacked responsibility, not because she lacked faith or devotion. No, they judged her because she didn't come from money, because she came from a tight-knit community instead of a gated one, because she worked night shifts while Rick attended charity dinners, because his family carried influence, and hers carried dignity. And in a world obsessed with wealth, influence usually speaks louder than truth. Julie lost her son not through failure, but through false assumptions wrapped in polished smiles. People believed Rick's father when he whispered lies. People believed Julie wasn't ready or capable, even as she prayed over her child every night. People believed status meant wisdom. So, the courtroom didn't see her strength. It only saw her paycheck. And the judge, swayed by the prestige of Rick's family, made a decision that broke her heart in a way she could never explain. Now here she stood, her reputation once torn apart, facing the very circles that fed those lies. Yet something powerful lingered under the surface. The same man who took her child was now holding a test result that shattered the life he thought he controlled. He stood broken at his own celebration. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't triumph. This wasn't karma as entertainment. This was truth, finally catching up to a story built on judgment. Julie wasn't unfit. She was simply unheard. And tonight, the room full of polished laughter and designer dresses had no idea that the balance of pain had just shifted. Julie stood quietly beside Malcolm, her fingers resting in his hand as soft jazz floated through the room. Despite the whispers, despite the stares, she carried something the crowd couldn't see. Peace. Real peace. The kind that grows after surviving heartbreak so deep it changes how you breathe. Her eyes drifted across the ballroom once more. For years, she had avoided places like this, not because she was unwelcome, but because she once believed the lie they created about her. Yet here she was, steady, grounded, changed. And bestie, this is where the question settles in your heart. How did a woman the world rejected end up with the miracle family she prayed for? and twins. How did someone who lost everything because of lies find a love that held her through healing? Find a man who didn't judge her past but celebrated her strength? Find a life that was hers, not because someone gave permission, but because she rebuilt it with faith, community, and quiet courage? And what did it take for truth to finally rise above the judgments that once crushed her? This story isn't about revenge. It's not about watching someone fall. It's about how a woman climbed out of the deepest valley and discovered blessings she never expected, including 2 beautiful babies who would one day call her Mama. So, before we journey into her past, her heartbreak, and the twist that shocked an entire circle of wealthy families, bestie, let me ask you, if you've ever prayed for justice, if you've ever believed that truth eventually wins, do me one favor. Please like this video and comment, "Justice wins." It helps YouTube push this story out so others can hear it too. Because Julie's story, it isn't just a story. It's a reminder that God doesn't forget the ones the world overlooks. The morning Julie met Rick, Atlanta was alive in a way that matched the quiet rhythm of her spirit. The city hummed with people heading to work, street vendors setting up their stands, and buses releasing their brakes with long sighs at every intersection. It was a warm day, one of those mornings where the sun rose early and painted soft gold across the sidewalks. Julie had finished an overnight shift at the diner and stepped into her favorite cafe before heading home. The place wasn't fancy, but the owner brewed the richest caramel hint coffee in town, and the regulars, mostly aunties from her church, filled the place with comforting chatter. She pushed open the glass door, the bell chiming above her. The aroma of roasted beans immediately filled her senses. Her shoulders relaxed. She scanned the room for an empty seat. It was packed, as usual, with early risers, students typing on laptops, and construction workers grabbing breakfast before heading to their sites. At the far end of the cafe, seated at a small wooden table, was a man she'd never seen before. Blonde hair brushed neatly across his forehead, a crisp button-down shirt, a laptop open beside a journal filled with handwriting that looked almost too neat to be rushed. Everything about him seemed composed, like he lived in a world where things rarely fell apart. Julie almost walked past him without another look, but then something unexpected happened. He glanced up, not in the casual passing way strangers do when someone walks by. No, his gaze lingered for a second too long, as if her presence caught him off guard. There was curiosity in his eyes, but not the uncomfortable kind. It was gentle, warm. He closed his journal slightly, as though making room for the moment. Julie turned her attention back to the counter, trying not to overthink anything. She'd just worked 9 hours straight. Her hair was tied back with a simple scarf, and her navy blue uniform still smelled faintly of grease and vanilla from late-night dessert orders. She didn't feel like someone who would catch anyone's attention, least of all a man who looked like he stepped out of a polished magazine ad. "Good morning, Miss Julie," the cafe owner, Mr. Hernandez, greeted her. "The usual?" She nodded. "Yes, sir. Extra cream today," he chuckled. "Long night again." "You know it." As she waited for her drink, she could feel the stranger's gaze return to her. It wasn't intrusive, just steady enough that it tugged at something inside her. When she turned again, he offered a small, polite smile. She offered one back, unsure why her heart skipped in the tiniest, most unexpected way. When her coffee was ready, she grabbed the cup and looked for a place to sit, forgetting that there were no empty tables. She sighed softly, then decided she'd just drink the coffee standing near the window before heading home. That's when she heard him speak, lightly, but clear enough that she stopped in her tracks. "There's space here if you'd like to sit." Julie froze. She glanced over her shoulder to confirm he was speaking to her. He pointed to the empty chair across from him. "You can have it, please." His voice had a calmness that seemed out of place in the bustling cafe. She hesitated. Men approached her often enough at work, some polite, some not, but this felt different. He wasn't trying to charm her. He wasn't leaning back with arrogance or pretending he wasn't watching her. He spoke as if offering a seat was simply the human thing to do. She stepped forward slowly. "Are you sure? I don't want to interrupt you." "You won't," he said simply. Just like that, she sat. Up close, she noticed small details she'd missed earlier. His eyes were a vivid shade of blue, clear, steady, observant. His shirt sleeves were rolled to his elbows, revealing a watch that probably cost more than her rent, but nothing about him felt arrogant. He seemed sincere. She took a sip from her cup, trying to relax. "Thank you for the seat. This place gets so packed in the mornings." "It really does," he replied. "I'm trying to get some work done before a meeting, but honestly, I've been watching the crowd more than anything." Julie smiled, the kind that crept naturally onto her face. "People watching is its own entertainment." "Agreed." He extended his hand. "I'm Rick." She shook it lightly. "Julie." The moment their hands touched, a strange warmth rushed through her. Not romantic, not yet, but something unmistakably human. Connection, something she hadn't felt in a long time. "So, Julie," he began, "do you come here often?" She chuckled. "Only when I've survived a night shift." "You work nights?" "Sometimes. I'm a waitress at Melody's Diner, a few blocks from here." "That explains the uniform," he said with a soft grin. "You must be exhausted." "A little," she admitted. "But coffee helps." As they spoke, something unspoken opened between them, like two strangers, who didn't expect a conversation but somehow found one that felt easy. Julie didn't normally talk this much to someone she'd just met, but Rick had a way of listening, really listening. He didn't interrupt. He didn't glance at his phone. He didn't try to impress her with stories about himself. Instead, he asked about her family, her community, her favorite gospel songs, and the neighborhood where she grew up. It surprised her how interested he seemed, especially when she mentioned her church choir. His eyes lit up, and he leaned slightly forward. "Do you sing?" "A little. I'd love to hear you sometime." She laughed. "I didn't say I was good. Doesn't matter. People who sing usually have a story behind their voice." Julie tilted her head. "What's your story then?" He tapped the closed journal beside him. "Still writing it, I guess." By the time they finished talking, nearly an hour had passed. The cafe had begun to empty as the morning rush tapered off. She realized it was time for her to head home before her next shift. "It was nice talking to you," she said as she stood. "You too," he replied, rising to his feet. "Would you maybe like to grab lunch sometime? I know a great spot not far from here." She hesitated, not because she didn't want to, but because she wasn't used to this. Men didn't normally ask her out with this kind of sincerity, and certainly not men like him. But something in her heart nudged her gently forward. "Lunch sounds nice," she said softly. Rick's smile grew, not wide, not overbearing, but warm enough to ease her nerves. He handed her a small business card with his number handwritten on the back. "Text me when you're rested." She nodded. "I will." She walked out of the cafe with a smile she tried and failed to hide. The sunlight felt brighter. The street noises felt less sharp. She didn't know what would come from meeting someone so different from her. Someone from another world entirely, but the spark between them was undeniable. And that spark would grow into something she never expected. Rick was nothing like Julie expected. Their first lunch date, held at a small soul food restaurant near her church, set the tone for everything that followed. She chose the place intentionally, somewhere warm, comforting, and filled with people she trusted. Rick walked in, wearing a neatly pressed shirt and a curious smile, instantly greeted by the smell of fried catfish, seasoned greens, and cornbread fresh from the oven. Julie laughed softly as he looked around. "Is this your first time in a place like this?" He nodded. "Honestly, yes, but it smells incredible." "It is," she said proudly. "Best food in the city." They ordered plates full of classics, mac and cheese that melted on, the tongue, spicy wings, peach tea sweet enough to make anyone sigh. Julie watched him take the first bite, and his eyes widened. "Wow," he said. "How have I lived in this city this long without eating here?" She grinned. You needed the right tour guide. Their conversation flowed easily again, just like at the cafe. Rick asked about her choir rehearsals and her favorite hymns. Julie asked about his job in tech and the projects he was working on. He explained things simply, never making her feel small or uneducated. She liked that about him. He wasn't trying to impress her, just share his world in a way she could understand. After lunch, they walked together down the block toward her church. The neighborhood was lively, kids playing tag, neighbors shouting greetings across fences, the scent of barbecue from a nearby porch drifting through the air. "I love it here," Rick said quietly. Julie blinked. "Really? It's not exactly the fancy side of town. That's why I like it. It feels real." His sincerity caught her off guard. She smiled, touched by the honesty in his tone. When they reached the church, Julie paused at the entrance. "I usually take a walk around here after lunch when I'm off. Helps me clear my mind. Can I walk with you?" She nodded. They strolled past the playground, past rows of brick houses where families had lived for generations, past the thrift shop her aunt managed. Every time someone waved at Julie, Rick waved too, almost shyly, as if trying on something new. The older women outside the salon whispered, softly but not softly enough, "Who is that man with Julie? He looks fancy. She better bring him to church next Sunday." Julie covered her face with her hands. "I'm so sorry. They're harmless. I promise." Rick laughed. "I like them already." As weeks passed, their closeness deepened. Rick began attending church events. Not pushy, not pretending, just showing up to understand the world she loved. He helped at the fall festival, carrying crates of donated canned goods. He clapped along at choir practice even though his rhythm was questionable. He even tried collard greens cooked by the choir mothers, too spicy for his taste, but he finished the whole plate to be polite. Julie admired him for trying, for caring, for listening. One evening, he texted her, "Meet me at the rooftop on Pine Street tonight." She wasn't sure what to expect, but curiosity led her there. When she arrived, she found a small speaker playing soft jazz, 2 folding chairs, and a simple picnic basket. Rick's smile was sheepish. "I didn't know what snacks to bring, so I got everything." Inside the basket were strawberries, sweet rolls, sparkling water, and a bag of chips she'd once mentioned loving after long shifts. The city skyline glowed behind them, the warm breeze brushing past their shoulders. Julie leaned back in her chair, letting the music settle into her bones. "This is beautiful," she said quietly. "I wanted to do something that felt like us," he admitted. Simple, calm, honest. She turned to him, her heart tugging in a way she didn't want to analyze too deeply. "What about you?" she asked. "What do you do to relax?" He chuckled. "I don't get many chances, but this feels better than anything I've tried." They talked about childhood dreams, fears, and future goals. Julie admitted she wanted to work with kids someday, maybe even run a community reading program. Rick confessed he wanted to build something meaningful in the tech world, not just chase money. As the night went on, the jazz softened, and the conversation became deeper, more vulnerable. When Rick reached for her hand, he did it slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She didn't. Her fingers curled into his naturally, like they'd been waiting for that moment. And for the first time in a long while, Julie felt hope blooming quietly inside her. Julie's family met Rick sooner than expected. It happened on a Sunday after morning service. The church parking lot was filled with laughter, people carrying casserole dishes, children running between legs, and aunties shouting blessings across the pavement. Julie had invited Rick to service casually, not expecting him to accept so quickly, but he did. He showed up in a simple button-down shirt and clean slacks, nothing too flashy. He looked nervous, smoothing his sleeves every few minutes, but when he saw Julie approaching, he relaxed. "You made it," she said with surprise and warmth. "I said I would," he replied, offering her a small bouquet of daisies, her favorite flowers, which she didn't remember telling him. Julie's mother eyed the bouquet immediately. "Oh, he came prepared." "Mom," Julie whispered, flustered. Her mother grinned. "What?" "I'm just saying he has manners." The choir welcomed Rick with open arms. The ushers shook his hand. The children pointed at him because they weren't used to seeing a white man sit in the fourth pew. But no one treated him poorly. No one whispered about his background. No one questioned his presence. They welcomed him because Julie welcomed him. After service, her cousins surrounded him with questions. So, Rick, you know how to play spades? You eat barbecue? You scared of hot sauce? You sing? Julie, does he sing? Rick laughed nervously, but answered every question with patience. Julie's father eventually pulled him aside. You treat my daughter right. Rick nodded. Yes, sir. I care about her. That's all I need to hear. Julie's family embraced Rick because they saw her glow, her smile, the peace she carried when she spoke about him. Her family wasn't perfect, but they loved fiercely, and they extended that love to anyone who brought her joy. Rick's family, however, was another story. The day Julie met Rick's parents, she walked into their polished suburban home with a prayer in her heart. She wore a simple dress, classy but not extravagant. She brought a homemade sweet potato pie as a gesture of respect, something her grandmother taught her to do when meeting elders. Rick squeezed her hand at the front door. They'll be fine, he whispered. But the moment his mother opened the door, Julie felt something shift. Not hostility, not cruelty, but a distance, a pause, the kind that comes before opinions form. Hello, his mother said with a tight smile. You must be Julie. I am, Julie replied warmly. Thank you for having me. His mother stepped aside. Come in. His father offered a handshake that felt formal, almost too firm, as if proving something without words. Julie walked through their living room, pristine white sofas, silver-framed, photographs, shelves lined with awards from Rick's academic years. The air felt stiff, like the home wasn't meant for laughter, only presentation. During dinner, the questions began. So, Julie, his mother started, what are your career plans? I'm working now and exploring opportunities in community programs, Julie answered gently. Oh, his mother said, exchanging a glance with his father. Julie caught it. The silent judgment. Rick noticed too. Mom, Dad, Julie's work is meaningful. The kids adore her. His father forced a smile. Of course. Community work is admirable. The conversation continued, but the warmth never came. Later, as Julie and Rick prepared to leave, his mother said softly, Our world can be challenging, Julie. I just hope you're ready for it. Ready for what? Julie wondered. Ready to be judged? Ready to be underestimated? Ready to be seen as less than because she didn't grow up in wealth? Rick heard it too. He apologized in the car, his eyes filled with frustration. I'm so sorry. They have their ideas, but they'll come around. Julie forced a smile. It's okay. I expected it. But she didn't expect how far his family's opinions would go. Rick didn't wait long to propose. Their relationship grew quickly, steady, sincere, and filled with moments that felt too real to ignore. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't forced. It simply unfolded like two lives aligning on purpose. He chose a warm afternoon in Grant Park, where the cherry blossoms bloomed in soft waves of pink. It was a place Julie loved, a peaceful corner of Atlanta where she took walks to clear her mind. Rick remembered that. He led her along a path scattered with petals. Julie laughed as a breeze swept through the branches, sending blossoms drifting like confetti. This place is beautiful today, she said, taking in the scenery. Rick nodded, but his hand trembled slightly. She noticed. Are you okay? She asked. He stopped walking. Actually, I'm more nervous than I expected. Before she could ask why, he reached into his pocket. Julie's heart stopped. He lowered himself to one knee, the grass brushing against his pant leg, petals falling around him like they had rehearsed the moment. Julie, he began softly, you changed my life. You taught me how to slow down, how to appreciate things that aren't measured in numbers or deadlines. You showed me what love looks like when it's honest. I can't imagine my life without you. Julie's hands covered her mouth as tears gathered. I want to build a home with you, he continued. A family, a life rooted in love, not in expectation. Will you marry me? The world blurred around her. She nodded through tears. Yes. Yes, Rick, I will. He slipped the ring onto her trembling finger and rose to embrace her. The applause startled them both. Their families had been waiting behind the trees, watching from a distance, her cousins cheering, her mother crying into a handkerchief, his mother clapping politely, his father nodding stiffly. Julie laughed through tears as they surrounded the couple. Her family engulfed Rick in hugs. His family offered congratulations, though quieter, more reserved. The celebration continued back at Julie's community center, where tables were filled. With food, gospel music played in the background, and children danced freely. Rick looked overwhelmed but happy. He hugged people he didn't know, accepted plates of food he couldn't pronounce, and joined a circle of elders who insisted on praying over the couple. Julie watched him blend, awkward but willing, and she felt her love deepen, because he was trying to belong, trying to understand, trying to love her whole world, not just the parts that were easy. Her mother pulled her aside. Baby, if he makes you smile like that, he's a good man. Julie nodded. He really is. But her mother added gently, just remember, love needs work, especially when two worlds come together. Be patient, but also be wise. Julie took the advice to heart. The weeks after the proposal were filled with wedding planning, family interactions, and moments that should have been simple joy, but life rarely unfolds without small warnings tucked beneath the surface. Julie noticed these signs early. One afternoon, she and Rick visited his parents' home for a formal dinner. His father uncorked an expensive bottle of wine. To the future, he toasted. Julie smiled politely, lifting her glass. His mother added with a delicate pause, "And may the future bring refinement." Julie faltered. "Refinement? Oh," his mother said quickly, "just the usual changes marriage brings. New habits, new circles, new expectations." Julie felt the sting beneath the politeness. Another moment came when Rick introduced Julie to one of his colleagues at a corporate luncheon. The woman smiled warmly, too warmly, and said, "You're Julie? Oh, wow. Rick never mentioned your background." Julie kept her composure. "What do you mean by that?" "Oh," the colleague exclaimed, flustered. "I just meant, your upbringing seems so grounded. Refreshing, really." Rick stepped in quickly. "Let's get seated." But Julie heard it. Grounded meant different. Different meant not like us. Not like us meant you don't belong here. Once, at brunch with Rick's relatives, a cousin asked lightly, "So, Julie, do you think your community will adjust to a more upscale lifestyle?" Julie felt a lump in her throat. "My community is already full of love and dignity." The cousin blinked. "Of course. Of course." The comments always came softly, coated in politeness, but they weren't harmless. They were quiet reminders that some people would always see her as a guest in a world she hadn't asked to join. Meanwhile, her own community embraced Rick with full hearts, but they also worried for her. Her Aunt Denise pulled her aside one evening. "Honey, you love him, that's clear. But be careful. Some circles smile at you while plotting where they think you fit." Julie sighed. "I know." Her aunt cupped her chin. "Don't lose yourself trying to fit into someone else's comfort." Rick, for his part, never made her feel lesser. He held her hand tightly whenever someone said something subtle. He whispered, "You don't need to change. They'll learn." But Julie knew learning required willingness, and not everyone in his world wanted to learn. These gentle warnings, the comments, the lingering glances, the pauses, were small cracks in a foundation built on love. She didn't know then how those cracks would widen, how they would reshape her life completely. She couldn't foresee the courtroom, the custody battle, or the heartbreak ahead. She only knew one thing: she loved Rick, and she believed love would be enough. For now, Julie remembered the morning she found out she was pregnant as one of the softest memories she carried in her heart. She had been standing in her small bathroom, sunlight slipping through the blinds, turning the room into warm gold. She had taken the test only because she felt unusually tired, not because she expected anything life-changing. But when the faint line appeared, her breath caught in her chest. Her hands trembled. Tears gathered. She pressed her palm over her belly, whispering a quiet prayer. She imagined a future filled with late-night feedings, lullabies, and tiny socks folded neatly in drawers. She imagined Rick learning how to swaddle a newborn while pretending not to panic. She imagined introducing her baby to her church family, who would surely smother the child with love, prayers, and endless blessings. She imagined joy. When she told Rick the news later that evening, he lifted her in his arms, spinning her gently until she laughed breathlessly. He kissed her forehead again and again, whispering, "We're going to be parents. Julie, this is perfect." The joy in his voice made her heart swell, but that joy shifted when his family found out. At first, they smiled politely. Rick's mother touched Julie's belly once, the gesture careful and distant, like she was touching something breakable. "Congratulations," she said, but there was no warmth, no excitement, only the echo of something held back. Later that evening, after dessert was served and polite conversation dwindled, Rick's aunt approached Julie near the living room window. Being a parent is a big responsibility. She began with a smile that felt too practiced, especially raising a child with blended heritage. "Have you thought about that?" Julie blinked, confused. "Thought about what, ma'am?" "How different the world can be for a biracial child," the aunt replied. "Certain environments can be challenging. Children need exposure to the right spaces early on." Julie forced a small smile. "I plan to raise my child with love, with faith, with stability." The aunt tilted her head. "Of course. But love isn't always enough. It takes more than heart. It takes the right environment." Julie excused herself quietly. Later, Rick's grandmother spoke in a similar tone, though softer. "My dear, babies need structure, predictability, exposure to certain values." She patted Julie's hand gently. "Your community is vibrant, but is it prepared for what this child will need?" Julie's breath tightened. The comments continued in different shades over the weeks. "Do you know how to care for textured hair? Will the child grow up between two different worlds? Are you ready for what people might say? Will you be able to manage the financial expectations? You work long hours. How will that affect the baby?" Each remark came dressed as concern, but Julie felt the weight behind every question. None of the comments were about parenting. None were about nurturing. They were about her. She tried to ignore it, reminding herself that pregnancy made emotions heavier, but she couldn't ignore the way Rick's mother watched her the next time they visited. Eyes, drifting toward Julie's stomach, then to her clothes, then to her hands, almost assessing. One afternoon, Rick returned from visiting his parents alone. His face was tight, his shoulders tense. Julie looked up from folding laundry on the couch. "What happened?" she asked. He hesitated, sitting beside her. "They asked if you're prepared." "Prepared for what?" "To raise a child in our world." Julie's mouth went dry. "What does that even mean?" Rick rubbed his temples. "They're worried. They say the baby will need certain experiences, connections, surroundings." "Connections?" Julie repeated, her voice hollow. "Rick, I grew up in a community where children are loved, supported, prayed over, where neighbors help each other, where elders step in like family. Why isn't that enough?" "It is," he said quickly. "To me, it is. But they think differently." Julie looked away, blinking back tears. She'd never felt ashamed of where she came from. Until now. The final sting came at a family dinner 2 months later. Julie had cooked for hours, cornbread muffins, seasoned chicken, sautéed vegetables, dishes that tasted like her childhood. She wanted to show them a piece of her heart. As the plates were passed around, Rick's cousin smiled politely, but whispered to another relative, "This is interesting. Not what the baby will be used to, I suppose." Julie heard it. The rest of dinner blurred. Rick noticed her silence in the car. "Talk to me," he said gently. She swallowed. "Your family doesn't think I'm good enough." His face twisted with frustration. "That's not true." Yes, it is, she whispered. They smile, but everything they say hints at it. Will she know how to raise a biracial child? Will she give the baby the right exposure? Can she handle this world? They don't think I belong. Rick reached for her hand. Julie, I belong with you. Our baby belongs with us. My family will adjust. She nodded, but her heart carried the bruise. What she didn't know then was that the bruising was only beginning. Rick's father had always been quiet around Julie, the type of man who observed more than he spoke. He carried himself with a boardroom confidence that came from decades of leading teams and managing wealth. His handshake was firm, his smile calculated, his words chosen with precision. At first, Julie mistook his reserved nature for shyness or generational habits, but over time, she recognized it for what it truly was, a silent appraisal. As her pregnancy progressed, Rick's father grew more vocal. It began during a visit to their home 2 months before Julie's due date. Rick's father requested a private conversation with his son in the study. Julie stayed in the living room, sipping water and rubbing her belly, trying to calm herself. She could feel the tension before she heard a single word. Inside the study, voices were muffled, but tense. Rick tried to keep his tone steady. His father's deeper voice carried a sharper edge. "You're not thinking ahead," his father said. "You're reacting emotionally." "She's my wife," Rick replied. "And we're having a child." "Yes," his father said. "But marriage doesn't erase reality. She comes from a background vastly different from ours." Julie felt her stomach twist. Rick's voice grew firmer. "And that background makes her who she is, someone compassionate, resilient, grounded." His father scoffed lightly. "Grounded is one way to put it." There was a pause, then his father continued. "Think about the long-term impact. Schooling, social expectations, future opportunities. Children absorb their environment early. Will she expose the child properly? Will she guide them the way someone in your position must?" Rick exhaled sharply. "We will raise this child together." His father didn't relent. "She sings in a church choir. Her community is charming, yes, but charming won't give the child the influence needed to move through circles you operate in. You mustn't let sentiment cloud your judgment." Julie closed her eyes, feeling a wave of heat rush through her. Then the voice she had dreaded hearing. "What about her faith practices? They're expressive, emotional. Our family has always taken a more quiet, intellectual approach to religion. Her traditions are loud. Will that confuse the child?" Julie pressed a hand over her belly, fighting tears. Rick responded quickly. "Her faith is beautiful. It's strong. There's nothing wrong with it." His father's reply held an unsettling calm. "Strength is one thing. Stability is another. You must consider whether her way of raising children aligns with the kind of structure your child will need." Julie felt tears fall before she could stop them. She wiped them quickly, not wanting Rick to see. Later that night, after his father left, Rick found her standing in the kitchen, staring at the sink. "Julie," he said softly, coming behind her. She didn't move. "I heard everything." He froze. "Julie." She turned to him, her face wet. "Your father thinks I'm unfit." "No," Rick insisted. "He's wrong. He's biased." She swallowed hard. "But you didn't correct him when he said my faith is confusing, or that my background isn't enough, or that my upbringing doesn't prepare me." Rick stepped closer. "I was trying." "You didn't defend me," she whispered. His shoulders sagged. "I didn't know how to without making things worse." Julie wrapped her arms around herself. "I've been judged for things I never chose. I can't change where I grew up. I can't change the fact that my church sings loudly. I can't change the fact that my family isn't wealthy." "I don't want you to change," Rick whispered, touching her cheek. "But your father wants me to," she replied. "And he's trying to convince you that I'm not enough." That night, Julie lay awake long after Rick fell asleep, staring at the ceiling with her hand resting over her unborn child. She thought of her mother singing hymns in the kitchen, of her pastor, praying with strength, of children laughing in her neighborhood. All the things that shaped her now felt like marks held against her. Rick's father continued, subtly undermining her in the weeks that followed. During one family dinner, he asked, "Julie, have you considered parenting classes? Perhaps something more aligned with structured households?" Julie forced a smile. "I've been preparing in my own way." His father nodded with a polite smile. "Preparation looks different for everyone. Some approaches are simply more effective." Once, he suggested hiring a nanny from a more polished background, a phrase that stung so sharply, Julie excused herself from the table. Each comment was coated in civility but heavy with judgment. Julie began shrinking inside herself. She didn't realize then that his comments weren't random. They were intentional. They were planting seeds. Seeds that would later grow into poisonous doubts in places where decisions held power. David's birth was one of the sweetest moments of Julie's life. The labor had been long, exhausting, but triumphant. When the nurse finally placed her newborn son on her chest, Julie felt a warmth sweep through her entire being. David had her smile, soft, full, and Rick's light brown hair. His tiny fingers curled around her thumb, and her heart swelled with a love so fierce she could barely breathe. She prayed over him softly, thanking God for bringing him into the world safely. Rick was emotional too. He kissed her forehead, stroked David's back, and whispered, "He's perfect, Julie." For the first few days, everything felt right. But the peace didn't last. Rick's mother visited the hospital and watched Julie breastfeed with a critical eye. "Are you sure he's getting enough?" she asked the nurse loudly. "Her diet is different." Julie swallowed her discomfort. Rick's father asked the pediatrician pointed questions. "Do you track how often she brings him in?" Some young mothers are forgetful. Julie felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I'm not forgetful," she said quietly. The pediatrician smiled politely but didn't challenge Rick's father. After they brought David home, subtle interference grew worse. Rick's mother visited excessively, watching Julie like a supervisor. She asked repetitive questions about feeding schedules, nap times, and hygiene. "It's important to keep things consistent," she said pointedly one afternoon as she inspected the nursery. Julie bit her tongue. Then there was their neighbor, Mrs. Carter, who lived across the street. She approached Rick's mother one morning and whispered just loud enough for Julie to hear, "I saw Julie coming home late last night. Is she leaving the baby alone?" Julie turned sharply. "I wasn't alone. My mother was here." Mrs. Carter blinked. "Oh, I didn't realize." Rick's mother gave a tight smile. Some routines take time to establish. Julie walked inside before she said something she'd regret. But the worst came subtly, quietly, from people she didn't realize were influenced. A home care nurse hired by Rick's parents visited just to check progress. She took notes on everything: bottle prep, burping techniques, diaper changes. She frowned when Julie sang David to sleep. "That may overstimulate him," she muttered. Julie kept singing anyway. One afternoon, a health official knocked on their door. "A wellness visit," she explained. Julie welcomed her in, confused. The woman asked detailed questions about Julie's schedule, diet, work hours, emotional state. Julie answered politely, but something felt off. Later, she overheard one of Rick's relatives whispering to another, "We just want what's best for the baby. If that means stepping in early, then we should." Julie realized then, this was coordinated. This was intentional. This was influence, quiet, strategic, and cold. Her exhaustion from late-night feedings became framed as disorganization. Her church community visiting became labeled too loud and disruptive. Her working-class family became an unstable environment. Her part-time job became evidence of financial strain. Every part of her life was being used as ammunition. Rick tried to support her, but he was stretched thin between his love for her and his loyalty to his family. "They mean well," he repeated often. Julie nodded, but she didn't believe it anymore. The final blow came when David caught a mild cold. Julie rushed him to the clinic. The doctor, one who had known Rick's family for years, took notes while glancing at Julie like she was careless. "You missed last week's check-in," he remarked. Julie frowned. "I was never told there was one." "Oh." The doctor said, "I was informed You forgot." Julie's stomach tightened. Someone had lied. Someone had set her up. Someone was building a case, quietly. Julie worked tirelessly to be the best mother she could be. She woke early, stayed up late, read articles, sought advice from elders, prayed over her son, and sacrificed her own rest to ensure David was comfortable. But every effort she made became fuel for someone else's narrative. She worked night shifts so she could care for David in the mornings, but Rick's family twisted this into, "Her schedule is unstable. How will the child adjust?" She cooked healthy meals, introducing David to homemade purees, but Rick's mother whispered, "She doesn't understand nutritional standards for children in higher circles." Julie took David to church events so he could be surrounded by love, but Rick, his aunt murmured, "All that noise. Is that developmentally appropriate?" She allowed David to nap on her chest, cherishing the bonding moments. But the nurse hired by Rick's mother scribbled notes and said, "That's unsafe. That indicates lack of awareness." Every affectionate moment was reframed as recklessness. Every motherly instinct was questioned. Every decision was examined under a harsh, unforgiving lens. One evening, Julie came home from the diner exhausted. David had been fussy all afternoon. She rocked him gently in the living room, humming a slow melody from her childhood. The front door opened. Rick returned with his parents. His mother's face tightened. The baby should be asleep in his crib by now. Julie didn't look up. "He had a hard day. He settles better in my arms." "That isn't good structure," his mother said. "Babies need routine." "This is confusing for him." Julie swallowed her rising frustration. Rick placed a hand on her shoulder to calm her, but his mother continued. "And your shifts are starting to concern us," she added. "How can you be fully present for a baby when you're exhausted from working nights?" Julie's voice shook. "I'm working because we need the income. I'm doing my best." Rick's father chimed in. "Intent isn't the same as effectiveness." Julie felt the room close in. Their narrative grew louder. One morning, a social worker unexpectedly visited their home. She claimed she was responding to community concerns. Julie's heart dropped. "Concerns?" Julie repeated. "What concerns?" "Reports of fatigue, inconsistent care techniques, irregular schedule, and possible developmental issues due to environmental overstimulation." Julie felt like she'd been punched. These weren't concerns. They were lies built from fragments of truth, twisted into accusations. The social worker observed the home, took notes, and watched as Julie held David. She asked questions that felt more like traps. "How often do you nap? Who watches the baby when you work? Do you have financial support? How do you manage stress? Do you ever feel overwhelmed?" Julie answered honestly, but honesty, she soon learned, could be used against her. Later that night, after the social worker left, Rick confessed quietly, "My father, he encouraged the wellness visit." Julie froze. "Why?" He thinks we should consider what's best for David long term." Julie's heart cracked. "You mean he thinks I'm a problem?" Rick said nothing. The silence confirmed everything. The custody hearing felt like a nightmare Julie couldn't wake from. It took place in a sleek Atlanta courthouse with cold marble floors and a judge known for favoring structured, affluent families. Julie entered the room wearing her best dress, simple, elegant, respectful. She clutched the silver cross necklace her mother had given her at baptism. David wasn't with her. She had kissed him goodbye that morning, unaware it would be the last time for a long while. Rick sat at the opposite table beside his attorney, who had been hired by his father. Rick looked conflicted, uncomfortable, but he didn't move toward her. He didn't reach for her hand. He didn't defend her. Julie sat alone except for her pastor, who whispered, "You're not by yourself. God is here." But when the judge entered, Julie felt small. The attorney for Rick's family spoke confidently, painting a portrait of Julie that resembled a stranger. A well-intentioned young woman, but lacking stability, an inconsistent work schedule, a background not aligned with the child's future needs, a pattern of fatigue and emotional strain, concerns raised by medical professionals, reports from neighbors about unusual household routines. Julie's jaw trembled. Every point was twisted, distorted. She wanted to shout the truth, but the judge remained expressionless, taking notes. When Julie's turn came, she stood and spoke from her heart. "I love my son. I love him deeply. I care for him every day. I work because I want him to have everything he needs. I sing to him. I pray over him. I keep him safe. My community supports me. My faith guides me. I'm learning. I'm growing. I am a good mother." Her voice cracked on the last word. The judge looked at her with a cool expression. "Mrs. Thompson, love is not the only factor in child rearing. Stability, opportunity, and environment must be considered." The ruling came swiftly. Temporary custody granted to Rick. Julie allowed supervised visitation only. Review scheduled after sufficient demonstration of environmental improvement. Julie gasped as her knees buckled. Her pastor held her upright. Rick looked down at his hands. Julie whispered, "You let this happen." Rick lifted his eyes, guilt etched across his face. I thought it was temporary." Julie shook her head, tears streaming. "You took my child." The gavel struck, sealing a wound that would follow her for years. As she walked out of the courtroom, empty-armed, broken, she felt the world tilt. She had loved with everything she had. She had sacrificed with every breath. And yet, the world judged her unfit, not because she was, but because they decided she must be. And that decision changed everything. Julie didn't remember walking out of the courthouse. She remembered the air feeling thin. She remembered her knees buckling. She remembered clutching the wall outside, as if the world had tilted beneath her. But the moment she returned home and saw David's empty crib, sheets neatly folded, mobile, still turning slowly from the draft, that was when the real heartbreak settled. She sank to the floor, pressing her forehead to the tiny mattress, as silent sobs racked her body. Every corner of the room held echoes of him. Every blanket smelled faintly of baby lotion and innocence she could no longer touch. For days she barely ate, barely slept, barely spoke. She tried to pray, but every prayer dissolved into tears before it reached her lips. It was her pastor who arrived first, knocking with gentle persistence until she opened the door. He didn't preach. He didn't recite scripture. He simply sat beside her and let her cry. Later, some of the elder women from the church came, women who had lived through heartbreaks she never imagined. They cooked meals, cleaned her home, warmed her bathwater, and made sure she didn't disappear inside her grief. The choir director visited next. "You don't have to sing today," she whispered. "Just sit with us." Julie sat in the choir loft during rehearsal, silent, hands in her lap. But listening to the harmonies slowly untangled something tight in her chest. The church became the only place where her heart didn't feel like shattered glass. Slowly, very slowly, the darkness loosened its grip. She wasn't healed, but she wasn't alone. The elder women of the church formed a circle around her without ever saying it aloud. Miss Clara checked on her every morning with warm oatmeal and soft encouragement. Miss Ruth pressed scripture cards into her hand. Miss Evelyn took her on gentle walks around the community, never forcing conversation, just reminding her that the world was still moving and she didn't have to fear it. "What you lost was real," Miss Clara told her once, "but so is what remains." The choir became her refuge. She didn't sing yet, her voice shook too easily, but she attended rehearsals, letting the sound wash over her. Gospel chords had a way of holding broken pieces together. The altos grounded her. The sopranos lifted her. The tenors reminded her of strength. Reverend Thompson checked on her every week after service. He never minimized her pain or rushed her through grief. He told her, "God doesn't expect you to be strong every day. Some days survival is enough." Julie clung to those words. One afternoon, as the choir practiced, the director encouraged Julie to hum along. She tried. Her voice cracked. Tears rose, but no one stared. No one judged. Several women came and wrapped their arms around her without saying a word. This was what healing looked like. Slow, steady, quietly powerful. For the first time since losing David, Julie felt something warm inside her that wasn't sorrow. Hope. Julie needed purpose. She needed something to pour herself into, somewhere to channel the love she no longer had a place to give. So when the church began a literacy program for children in the neighborhood, she signed up before she could talk herself out of it. The first day, she sat with a group of third graders struggling with reading comprehension. Their questions were chaotic, their giggles non-stop, their energy overwhelming, but it filled a quiet part of her that had been hollow for too long. Next came the meal drives. Julie helped prepare food boxes, distribute them across the community, and organize donation days. The work was tiring, but faces lit up with gratitude every time she handed someone a box. It reminded her of the love she carried, even when life felt unfair. But the child mentorship program was where she felt something shift deeply. Working with young boys who needed structure, stability, and emotional guidance awakened a part of her heart she thought was permanently shut. She listened to their stories, helped with homework, talked through frustrations. Some days she simply sat beside them while they played basketball, offering quiet encouragement. Every act of service stitched her spirit back together, one small seam at a time. Julie wasn't whole yet, but she was no longer breaking. Malcolm entered her life without fanfare. He wasn't loud. He wasn't flashy. He didn't try to impress her. He appeared during a Saturday meal drive, unloading boxes from a truck with calm strength. Julie noticed the way he thanked every volunteer individually, the way he crouched down to speak. With neighborhood kids eye to eye, the way he offered help without making anyone feel small. His presence felt peaceful. When they finally spoke, it was simple. He handed her a stack of canned goods and said, "Thank you for being here." Julie blinked. "I should be thanking you. You're doing most of the lifting." He smiled softly. Everyone carries something. Some burdens just aren't visible. Something in his tone made her pause. He didn't pity her. He didn't analyze her. He simply saw her. As the weeks passed, they crossed paths often. At church, at community events, at food drives. Their conversations were short but warm. Malcolm asked about her day but never pried. He complimented her strength without making her feel like she had to perform it. He carried his own quiet grief. Julie sensed it, but he never used it to overshadow hers. For the first time since losing David, she felt safe talking to someone new. Friendship came gently. Malcolm walked her to her car after late volunteer shifts. He saved her a seat during church picnics. He noticed when she seemed overwhelmed and stepped in to help before she asked. But he never pushed, never rushed, never asked for more than she could give. One afternoon, as they sorted books for the literacy program, he handed her a children's devotional and said, "This made a difference in my life once. Maybe it'll bring you a little peace too." Julie traced the cover with her thumb. "Thank you. Some healing takes time," he said quietly. "And some healing takes people." Julie looked up at him then, really looked, and something in her chest loosened. Malcolm didn't fill the empty space David left behind. He didn't replace anything. He didn't try. He simply stood beside her as she rebuilt her life piece by piece. Healing wasn't a straight line, but now she wasn't walking it alone. And that small truth became the beginning of everything that would come later. Julie never expected her heart to feel steady again. After losing David, trust felt like something she couldn't afford to give freely. But Malcolm didn't approach her with intensity or pressure. He moved at the rhythm of her healing, offering space when she grew quiet and presence when she felt overwhelmed. He listened, really listened. During late volunteer shifts, Julie would express small worries, moments of insecurity, or flashes of doubt that surfaced as she tried to rebuild her life. Malcolm never rushed to fix anything. He let her finish her thoughts, and then he'd speak in a soft, thoughtful tone that made her shoulders relax. "You don't have to prove your strength here," he'd say gently. "You're allowed to feel." Unlike Rick's world, driven by appearances, status, and expectations, Malcolm offered something different: safety. He never reminded her of her past, never hinted at her losses, never made her feel like she had to earn worthiness. He affirmed her without exaggeration. "You carry a softness that comes from surviving storms," he told her once. "That's not weakness. That's endurance." Julie felt seen, not evaluated. He noticed when she became quiet and brought her warm tea without asking. He noticed when her smile flickered and shifted the conversation toward lighter topics. He noticed when she seemed tired and encouraged her to rest instead of pushing through. Malcolm's presence gave her something she hadn't felt in years, a place to exhale. Their connection deepened in small moments, the kind that don't announce themselves but bloom slowly over time. In the church kitchen, they wrapped utensils for meal drives while talking about childhood memories, life lessons, and favorite scriptures. Julie laughed more in those conversations than she had in months. Malcolm watched her with quiet admiration, not needing to interrupt or outshine. Choir rehearsals brought them even closer. Malcolm had a rich baritone voice that warmed every hymn. Julie's voice was still rebuilding, but standing beside him gave her confidence. One Wednesday evening, as the choir practiced a slow gospel piece, Malcolm leaned subtly toward her and whispered, "You sound stronger this week." Julie felt her cheeks warm. "I'm trying. You're finding your voice again," he replied, "and it's beautiful." Rainy nights became their most meaningful time. After a literacy event, a sudden downpour forced the volunteers to wait inside the community hall. Thunder rolled softly above, and water streaked the windows. Julie stood near the doorway watching the rain, arms wrapped around herself. Malcolm walked over quietly. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "Rain just makes me think. Good thoughts or heavy ones?" "A mix," she admitted. He didn't push. He simply draped his jacket over her shoulders, the warmth startling her, and stood beside her as the rain softened outside. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. The silence felt shared, not lonely. Julie realized then that healing wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was a quiet room, a gentle man, and the sound of rain reminding her she was still alive. The moment that shifted everything came unexpectedly. One evening, after a community event, Malcolm offered to walk Julie home. The sidewalk glowed under street lamps, and the scent of jasmine drifted through the air. When they reached the small pedestrian bridge near her neighborhood, Julie paused. "This is where I used to push David's stroller," she said softly. He loved looking at the water. Malcolm's expression softened. "Thank you for sharing that with me." Julie nodded, brushing a tear before it fell. "I'm trying to remember the good without falling apart." "You're doing more than trying," he said gently. "You're choosing to live again." They stood under the warm lantern glow, the creek beneath them whispering gently. Julie turned toward Malcolm, expecting him to step away, to maintain the careful space he always respected. Instead, he did something different, but still gentle. He reached for her hand, not with urgency, not with expectation, with reverence. "Julie," he murmured, "can I?" She didn't move, didn't speak. She simply looked into his eyes and saw no agenda, no judgment, no attempt to fill her wounds with his presence. Just sincerity. She nodded. Malcolm leaned in slowly, giving her plenty of time to change her mind. When their lips met, the kiss wasn't intense. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't about passion. It was about permission. Permission to feel again. Permission to let someone in. Permission to believe that her heart wasn't permanently broken. When they parted, Julie felt breathless, but not afraid. Malcolm whispered, "I would never hurt you, not ever." And for the first time in a long time, she believed someone. Love didn't fix Julie's life. She fixed it, with love supporting her. With Reverend Thompson's encouragement, she applied for a position at a local community center. She was hired as a program coordinator for youth mentorship, work she had already been doing as a volunteer. Her co-workers admired her patience. Her students adored her warmth. Her supervisors valued her leadership. She began dressing differently, not to impress, but because she finally felt worthy of taking up space again. Her steps grew steadier, her laughter deeper, her voice stronger. Her healing wasn't linear, but it was real. Malcolm stood beside her through every milestone. When she earned her first promotion, he brought flowers. When she faced setbacks, he reminded her she wasn't alone. When she doubted herself, He reminded her of how far she'd come. Julie also found peace in reclaiming motherhood emotionally, even if she didn't have David physically. She journaled prayers for him, attended parenting workshops, and volunteered in early childhood programs. Every step gave her back a piece of the identity she'd been robbed of. Rick's family had declared she wasn't fit, but life, faith, and community proved otherwise. Julie was becoming whole again, and this time, she wasn't doing it in the shadows. Healing eventually turned into hope, hope into comfort, comfort into love. Julie and Malcolm began talking about the future, not in grand plans, but in simple desires rooted in faith and peace. Malcolm confessed one evening, "I don't need a fancy life, I just want a home filled with peace." Julie smiled softly. "I want that too." They imagined a quiet home, with warm lighting and children's laughter, community involvement, church on Sundays, evening walks, family dinners, partnerships built on prayer rather than pressure. Malcolm spoke gently. "Whatever tomorrow holds, we'll face it together." Julie believed him, not because he promised perfection, he never did, but because he showed consistency. He matched every word with action. He loved her with patience, not demands, and he understood her loss without trying to erase it. Together, they built a future that wasn't rushed, a future with purpose, not performance, a future filled with the one thing Julie had been denied for so long, a safe place to love and be loved. It arrived on a Wednesday afternoon, an afternoon Julie thought would pass quietly. She had just finished helping a group of children stack books at the community center, when she returned home to find a cream-colored envelope sitting neatly on her doormat. The thick paper, gold edges, and embossed initials told her immediately that this wasn't something from her normal world. She picked it up slowly, feeling a strange heaviness in her chest. Her name was written in elegant script, Julie Thompson. Her old married name, a name she hadn't used since the custody ruling. A name she now only heard when she replayed painful memories she wished she could silence. Julie carried the envelope inside, setting it on the kitchen table as though it might fall apart if she touched it again. She stared at it for a long time, her hands trembling. Part of her wanted to throw it away without looking. Another part felt rooted to the floor, unable to breathe until she knew what it said. Finally, she opened it carefully. Inside was a lavish invitation from the Atlanta Country Club, an invitation to Rick and Vanessa's baby shower, a celebration for the child Rick believed was his. Her breath caught, her heartbeat slowed. The room around her blurred. Why would they invite her? Why now? Why reopen a wound that still ached even in her healing? Julie set the card down, covering her face with both hands. This wasn't just an invitation. This was a reminder of everything she lost, everything she suffered, everything she survived. And yet, the fact that it was addressed directly to her meant someone wanted her present. Someone wanted her to walk into a space that once rejected her. She didn't understand it. Not yet. But the tremor in her chest warned her that this invitation would change everything. Julie didn't touch the invitation again for hours. She moved around her home distractedly, washing dishes that were already clean, rearranging papers that didn't need sorting, pacing between the kitchen and living room as if movement would quiet her mind. But the questions wouldn't stop. What if Rick wanted to hurt her again? What if his family wanted to prove something? What if this was some twisted attempt to show her what she lost? Fear whispered warnings through her thoughts. Curiosity tugged on her heart. But deeper than both was something she didn't want to name out loud. Her motherhood instinct. She hadn't seen David in years. The court orders, the restrictions, the supervised visits that never progressed. Everything broke her further until she finally stopped trying to push against a system that wasn't built for her. But the possibility, no matter how faint, that her son might be present at that event shook something inside her. Would she get to see him from a distance? Would he recognize her face? Would he feel something, even if he didn't know why? Julie pressed her palm to her chest as tears welled. She whispered, "Lord, what am I supposed to do?" Her emotions pulled in opposite directions. Her mind warned her to stay away. Her heart whispered that this invitation was more than a mistake. She felt fear. She felt longing. She felt strength, trying to push through the mess of broken feelings. Attending meant reopening a chapter that nearly destroyed her, but ignoring it meant turning her back on something she was meant to face. Julie sank into her couch, gripping the card, feeling her pulse race. She didn't know whether to walk into that world again, but she knew she couldn't decide alone. Malcolm found her sitting quietly when he came by that evening, a casserole dish in his hands from a church potluck she had missed. He set it on the counter and noticed immediately that her eyes were distant. "What happened?" he asked gently. Julie didn't say anything at first. She simply handed him the invitation. He read it slowly. His expression didn't twist, didn't harden, didn't glare. Instead, he set the card down and pulled a chair beside her. "How do you feel?" he asked. Julie shook her head. "I don't know. Every part of me is tangled. That's understandable. I'm scared," she admitted. "Going back there feels like stepping into the same fire that burned me the first time." Malcolm nodded. "And yet, you're thinking about going," Julie exhaled shakily, because part of me wonders if David will be there, or if I'll see something that helps me understand where I stand now. I don't want to hurt myself again, but I also don't want fear to control me." Malcolm didn't hesitate. "If you go, I'll go with you." Her eyes widened. "Malcolm, I can't ask you to do that." "You didn't ask," he said softly. "I'm offering." She looked down, twisting her fingers. "It's not your world. It's not fair to drag you into." He reached out, placing his hand over hers. "You're part of my world. Wherever you walk, I'm not far behind." Julie swallowed a sob. Malcolm continued, "If you decide to attend, it won't be because you're alone. I'll stand next to you. I'll protect your peace. I won't let anyone disrespect you." His words wrapped around her heart like armor. Julie whispered, "How did I find someone like you?" "You didn't," he answered. "God sent me." For the first time since opening the invitation, Julie felt steady, not confident, just steady enough to breathe. The day of the baby shower arrived faster than Julie expected. She dressed with quiet care. Nothing flashy, nothing meant to provoke attention, just a soft, elegant outfit that reflected the woman she had grown into rather than the woman she once was. She stared at her reflection before they left. Her eyes carried strength now. Her posture carried purpose. Malcolm knocked softly on her door. "You ready?" "No," she admitted honestly. "But I'm going." They drove to the Atlanta Country Club, a place she once entered as Rick, his wife, then exited as someone who had been stripped of motherhood. As they approached the long, curved driveway lined with manicured bushes, Julie felt a chill crawl across her skin. The valet attendants, the fountain centerpiece, the polished glass doors. Everything looked exactly as she remembered. Her breath hitched. Malcolm reached for her hand. "You're not that broken woman anymore," he reminded her. "Walk in as the woman you became." She nodded slowly. As they stepped inside, warmth from chandeliers and soft music filled the foyer. But beneath the beauty, Julie felt the sting of memory, the judgmental stares, the whispered assumptions, the quiet cruelty masked as concern. This place once swallowed her whole. Not today. Today, she walked in with a man who loved her without condition and a heart that had survived everything meant to destroy it. The moment Julie entered the main ballroom, the atmosphere shifted. Several guests paused mid-conversation. Some straightened their posture. Others exchanged uneasy glances. A woman near the punch bowl whispered something behind her hand. Another guest raised a brow, trying to pretend she wasn't staring. Julie kept her chin lifted. Malcolm stayed close but didn't hover, giving her space to own the moment while still letting her feel supported. Rick's mother noticed her first. Her smile was tight, polite, forced. "Julie, how unexpected to see you here." "You sent an invitation," Julie replied calmly. "I assumed it was meant for me." Rick's mother blinked, caught off guard by Julie's composed tone. A group of Rick's relatives whispered in the corner. "Is that really her? I thought she moved away. Why would she come back? She looks different." Julie didn't react. As she walked further into the room, Faces she once knew flickered with concealed judgment. They greeted her with practiced friendliness, handshakes too firm, smiles too polished, compliments too empty. "Julie, how nice to see you. We weren't expecting you. You look, well." Their words felt like thin fabric covering sharp intentions. But Julie didn't shrink, didn't tremble, didn't apologize. She stood in the center of the world that once rejected her and remained steady, not because she had forgotten the pain, but because she had rebuilt herself after surviving it. Malcolm leaned close and whispered, "You're handling this with grace." Julie breathed out slowly. "I've learned a lot." What she didn't know yet was that the biggest revelation of her life was moments away. And this room, filled with polished smiles and familiar whispers, was about to watch the truth unravel them all. The baby shower ended with polite applause and clinking glasses, but Rick walked through the celebration like a man struggling to breathe. The envelope he opened earlier still burned in his mind. The test result, the sentence he couldn't escape. Probability of paternity, 0%. After the guests left, he retreated to a private lounge in the country club. The room was dim, quiet, and suffocating. He paced, ran both hands through his hair, and replayed the day in flashes. Julie's unexpected entrance, her strength, her presence, her calm, and now this. He sank into a chair, gripping the armrests. Every breath felt heavy. Every memory echoed with a truth he could no longer ignore. Footsteps sounded behind him. Vanessa entered the room. Her smile faltered when she saw his face. "Rick, what's wrong?" He didn't speak. He handed her the envelope. She opened it, skimmed it, froze. Her hand trembled. "Rick, I can explain." "Explain?" He cut in quietly, the edge in his voice sharper than he intended. "Explain how we celebrated a child that isn't mine. Explain how I stood beside you in front of my family, my friends, my colleagues, while this paper sat waiting for the truth to show up." Tears filled her eyes. "I was scared. I didn't know how to tell you." "Who is the father?" he asked. She looked away. Rick felt his stomach drop. Just months earlier, he supported the narrative that Julie wasn't suitable. Just months earlier, he let wealth, status, and influence define truth. Just months earlier, he believed lies because they were easier than examining himself. Now he stood in the same pain he once contributed to. The irony wasn't lost on him. The universe had handed him a truth he couldn't escape, and it was heavier than anything he expected. Rick tried returning to work the next morning. He walked into his office building wearing the same polished suit, the same confident expression, the same routine step, but none of it felt real. His assistant placed a folder on his desk, but hesitated. "Sir, the board wants to meet with you." "The board?" Rick asked, confused. "About what?" She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes flickered with something he recognized: pity. In the meeting, the board members sat in a perfect line, smooth expressions hiding sharp concerns. One cleared his throat. "Rick, we received word of complications in your personal life regarding parenthood." Another chimed in. "These types of situations affect public reputation. Investors notice. Clients worry about leadership stability." Rick clenched his jaw. "My private life shouldn't impact." "Your family image has always been tied to our brand," another member interrupted. "You understand how delicate these matters are." His empire, an empire built on presentation, structure, and control, was now shaking because of the same standards he once used to judge Julie. He felt the weight of hypocrisy press on him. Just years ago, he allowed others to question whether Julie could raise a child because of her background. Now he was the one being questioned. His father's voice had once called Julie unstable. His relatives once whispered about her environment. His colleagues once believed she couldn't offer the right lifestyle. And now? People whispered that Rick lacked discernment, that he'd been deceived, that he wasn't as composed as he appeared, that he was losing control of his own narrative. For the first time in his adult life, Rick felt the walls he built collapse inward. He didn't know how to stop it. The shift in Rick's social world happened quietly at first. Text messages from old friends slowed, then stopped. Business partners postponed meetings. Dinner invitations were suddenly rescheduled. People who once greeted him warmly now offered tight smiles and avoided eye contact. At a charity event later that week, Rick experienced the full force of the change. He approached a group of colleagues, all engaged in animated conversation. When he stepped into their circle, the conversation died abruptly. One man cleared his throat, adjusted his tie, and excused himself. Another offered Rick a weak handshake, then quickly moved away. A woman he had known for years gave him a sympathetic look. "I heard things are complicated," she said softly. "Complicated," Rick repeated bitterly. "People in these circles talk," she admitted. "They always do." He nodded, feeling the sting. Once, these same people believed every negative rumor about Julie. Once, they fueled the narrative that she wasn't capable or polished enough. Once, they reinforced the lie that background determined worth. Now he was the subject of their whispers. Now he understood how easily a reputation could be twisted, how effortlessly judgment could spread, how quickly people distanced themselves from those who suddenly seemed less ideal. For the first time, Rick felt what Julie felt: isolation, misjudgment, humiliation, injustice. His fall from grace wasn't violent, just subtle, quiet, and cold. Poetic justice didn't need to be loud. Sometimes it arrived in silence. Julie learned about Rick's situation from a church member who worked at a nearby office. The news spread quickly through Atlanta. Rick Thompson's baby shower had celebrated a child who wasn't biologically his. Julie paused when she heard the words. She stood still in the middle of stacking canned goods for a meal drive. Malcolm glanced at her, waiting for her reaction. But Julie surprised even herself. There was no satisfaction, no vindictive smile. No, he deserved it. Instead, she whispered, "Lord, help him." Malcolm studied her face. "You don't have to feel sympathy for someone who hurt you. I'm not excusing what he did," Julie replied gently. "But I know how it feels to have your world collapse. I know what it's like to lose a child. I wouldn't wish that pain on anyone. Not even him." "You have a good heart," Malcolm murmured. She shook her head lightly. "No, I just know what grace looks like. People showed me grace when I didn't have the strength to stand. I'm not going to become bitter now." She picked up another box, continued working, continued living her healed life. Julie had become the woman she once needed. Strong, compassionate, centered, unafraid. Rick's downfall didn't lift her. It only reminded her that pain cycles through people who refuse to examine their hearts. She had already done that work. She had already healed. She wasn't interested in revenge. She was interested in peace. Julie's life moved forward with calm rhythm. She woke each morning to sunlight through her curtains, brewed tea in a quiet kitchen, and walked into a community center where children greeted her with laughter. She prayed with Malcolm before they started their days. She sang in choir rehearsals again. Her world was simple, yet full. Her healing was visible. Her joy was steady. Her purpose was strong. Meanwhile, Rick's world unraveled. He returned to an empty home filled with arguments, betrayal, and unanswered questions. He attended board meetings where eyes avoided his. He faced a father whose disappointment now aimed at him instead of Julie. He watched friends fade into distance. Every room he walked into felt heavier. Every conversation carried judgment. Every decision reminded him of what he destroyed by trusting influence instead of truth. He saw Julie at the baby shower, strong, loved, and whole. He saw Malcolm beside her, gentle, supportive, steady. He realized that everything he once dismissed had become the very thing she built her life upon. He wasn't witnessing revenge. He was witnessing redemption, and it wasn't his. Julie had moved into a life shaped by faith and healing. Rick had stepped into a reality shaped by consequences. Their paths separated not because of punishment, but because of growth. Julie grew. Rick didn't. And now the contrast was undeniable. The church where Julie grew up felt different on her wedding day. Sunlight poured through the stained glass windows in soft colors, warming the wooden pews that held decades of family memories. The same sanctuary that once comforted her through nights of tears now welcomed her into a new season of joy. Guests filled every row. The choir hummed a soft harmony as people whispered prayers of gratitude. Elder women who once held Julie after court hearings now held tissues for happy tears. They had watched her walk through the valley of heartbreak, and now they watched her walk toward a love that honored her spirit. Julie stepped into the aisle in a simple ivory gown. Her hair flowed gently over her shoulders, and nothing about her looked forced or staged. Every step she took reflected healing. Every breath she inhaled carried peace. Malcolm stood at the altar in a slate-grey suit, his hands trembling slightly as he watched her approach. He wasn't a man shaped by wealth or public image. He was shaped by faith and sincerity. The moment he saw her, his eyes glistened. He didn't see a woman rebuilding from loss. He saw the woman God aligned him with. When she reached him, he held her hands gently, just as he had on the nights he helped her stand when depression tried to pull her under. Reverend Thompson smiled. Today we celebrate restoration. Today we witness what love looks like when it is patient, steady, and shaped by faith. The vows were simple. Julie promised honesty and partnership. Malcolm promised protection and tenderness. There was no performance, only truth. When they exchanged rings, there was a collective sigh from the congregation, joyful, relieved, grateful. And when Malcolm kissed his bride, the church erupted in applause. The sound echoed off the walls like a declaration. Her story didn't end in loss. It opened into something beautiful. Months into their quiet married life, Julie woke one morning with a sense she couldn't explain. She sat on the edge of the bed, one hand over her stomach, a whisper of hope rising inside her. She had felt this once before, during a time when joy collided with fear. This time, the fear wasn't there. Malcolm walked in, holding her favorite tea. He noticed her expression and immediately set the cup down. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" Julie's eyes filled as she handed him the test she'd taken moments earlier. "It's positive," she breathed. "Malcolm, I'm pregnant." He froze, then slowly knelt in front of her as if the moment required reverence. His forehead rested against her stomach. His voice cracked. "Thank you, Lord." They held each other for a long time, praying with more gratitude than words. Weeks later, during her first ultrasound, the technician smiled and turned the monitor toward them. "You're not just expecting, you're expecting two." Julie covered her mouth. "Twins?" The heartbeat sounds filled the room, two little rhythms, steady and alive. Malcolm grabbed her hand, unable to speak. Tears streamed freely down both their faces. It didn't feel like coincidence. It felt like restoration. It felt like God returning what life had once taken from her. Double. News traveled through the community faster than Julie expected. Within days, the church felt electric. Women approached her with baskets of homemade meals, knitted blankets, baby books, and assurances that they would be there for her every step of the journey. "You poured into our children," a choir mother said. "Now let us pour into yours." Her old mentor hugged her tightly. "Grace follows you, baby. It always has." The same hands that held her through courtroom loss now held her through prenatal joy. The same voices that prayed for her when she had nothing now sang encouragement as her belly grew. On Sundays, children ran up to touch her stomach, giggling as they asked, "Are the babies kicking yet?" Malcolm became protective, but never overbearing. He drove her to every appointment, took over most household tasks, and made sure she had support on her volunteering days. He even joined the men's group at church to prepare for parenthood. In every gathering, someone prayed over her. In every conversation, people expressed excitement for the twins' arrival. In every moment she felt surrounded, not judged or questioned, but embraced. It was the kind of love she once believed she would never experience. But God had a way of circling her life with the right people at the right time. The night the twins arrived, rain tapped softly against the hospital windows. Malcolm paced the hallway, whispering prayers of strength, while nurses moved in and out with updates. Hours passed until finally, Julie's doctor stepped forward with a warm smile. "Ready to meet your children?" Malcolm rushed into the room. Julie lay in bed, exhausted yet glowing. In her arms rested two tiny miracles, one wrapped in sky-blue cloth and the other in soft lavender. "This is Elijah," she whispered, kissing the baby boy's forehead. "And this is Grace," she added, brushing her nose against her daughter's cheek. Her name felt right. Elijah's small hand curled around Malcolm's finger. Grace blinked slowly, as if studying the world she'd just entered. Julie couldn't stop crying, but they were tears born of relief, gratitude, and something deeper, a restoration of the part of her heart she had once believed gone forever. Malcolm kissed her forehead. "They're perfect. And so are you." Julie looked at the twins and felt something settle inside her. This wasn't a replacement for what she lost. This was a new beginning, a chapter she never thought she would write. The ache that once lived in her chest softened. The empty space wasn't gone, but it was filled with a peace she didn't think she would ever know. Her daughter was named Grace for a reason. Her son was named Elijah because she needed a reminder that God still answers prayers. And together, they symbolized the part of motherhood stolen from her, but returned in a way only heaven could orchestrate. As months passed, Malcolm stepped into fatherhood with a devotion that softened everyone who witnessed it. He woke up for every feeding. He memorized the twins' breathing patterns. He learned lullabies and sang them off-key, but with so much love that Julie often cried watching him. He carried Elijah on one shoulder and Grace in his opposite arm, like he was built for this life. When Julie grew tired, he reminded her she wasn't alone. When she doubted herself, he reminded her she was chosen for this journey. One evening, as the twins slept in their bassinet, Julie rested her head on Malcolm's chest. "Do you ever get overwhelmed?" she whispered. "All the time." He chuckled softly. "But then I look at them and think, God trusted me to be their father, and he trusted me to love you. That's all I need." She looked up at him, her heart full. Malcolm wasn't the man she expected. He wasn't the man society told her she deserved. He wasn't the man who once failed to defend her. He was better. He was the man God placed in her life to show that love could be gentle, steady, and safe. As she watched him kneel beside the bassinet, whispering a prayer over Elijah and Grace, Julie knew one truth. This was the family meant for her, not forced, not stolen, not manipulated by wealth or power, but built on faith, healing, and love that honored her soul. God didn't give her back what she lost. He gave her something new, something whole. The family he promised her. The letter arrived on an ordinary Tuesday. Julie almost missed it, tucked between grocery flyers and a church newsletter. The handwriting on the envelope stopped her hand mid-motion, familiar, steady, unmistakable. Rick. She hesitated before opening it, not out of fear, but because the last time his name interrupted her life, it altered everything. Inside was a single folded page. "Julie, I don't expect your forgiveness. I don't expect a response. I only hope you read this knowing it comes from a man who finally understands the weight of his choices. I believed lies because they were convenient. I allowed my family's judgment to shape how I saw you. I let pride ruin something sacred. I failed you as a husband, and I failed myself as a father. When the truth about Vanessa came out, it shattered parts of me I didn't know could break, but it opened my eyes. My world collapsed the same way yours once did, and suddenly I understood what it feels like to be dismissed, doubted, and stripped of what matters most. You did nothing to deserve the pain I caused. Nothing. I hope life has been kind to you. I hope God restored everything you lost and more. I'm truly sorry. Rick." Julie read the letter twice, then placed it gently on the table. For the first time, she didn't feel anger tightening her chest. She didn't feel bitterness rising like it used to. She simply felt release. Malcolm entered the kitchen, drying his hands with a towel. He saw the letter and studied her expression. "You okay?" Julie nodded. "Yes, better than I expected." She wasn't relieved because Rick apologized. She was relieved because healing had already happened long before this moment. That evening, Julie sat on the porch with a light blanket around her shoulders. The twins played in the yard with their toys, while Malcolm grilled dinner nearby. She held the letter one last time before folding it neatly and slipping it into her Bible, not as a memory of pain, but as a reminder of how far God had carried her. She whispered a quiet prayer. Lord, I forgive him, not for his sake but for mine. And I thank you for guiding me to a life he was never meant to complete. Forgiveness didn't require reunion. It didn't require phone calls, visits, or reopening wounds. Forgiveness simply required peace. And Julie finally had plenty of that. Later, Malcolm wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Do you feel lighter? Yes, she said softly. Because I'm not walking backward. My life is here, with you, with our babies, with everything God gave back to me. Malcolm kissed her forehead. That's all that matters. The chapter with Rick didn't end in friendship or bitterness. It ended in closure. And Julie had no desire to revisit a door God already locked for her protection. Time softened the edges of every scar Julie once carried. The house she and Malcolm built overflowed with laughter, tiny footsteps, and the constant chatter of Elijah and Grace, now energetic little ones with endless curiosity. Sunday afternoons became their rhythm. The smell of cornbread filled the kitchen. Malcolm played old-school gospel songs softly on the radio while chopping vegetables. Julie danced between the stove and the counter, her apron tied loosely around her waist. "Mummy, can I stir?" Grace asked, standing on her tiptoes. "Only if you promise not to eat half the batter," Julie teased. Elijah ran through the kitchen with a toy airplane. "Daddy, look." "I see you, pilot," Malcolm called back, laughing. Family stopped by often, cousins, church members, elders who had prayed over Julie when she was broken. Now they came to celebrate her restored life. People gathered not out of pity, but out of genuine joy. After dinner, they sat on the porch, watching the twins chase fireflies. Julie leaned her head on Malcolm's shoulder, listening to the faint hum of gospel still playing inside. Her life was not glamorous or loud. It was steady, warm, full, and blessed, the very opposite of the world she once survived. And she wouldn't trade a single piece of it. One quiet night, after the twins fell asleep, Julie walked into their nursery. Soft light glowed through the curtains. She brushed her fingers along the crib railing and let her thoughts drift to the past. The courtroom, the accusations, the loneliness, the nights she cried until her voice failed. Back then, she thought the pain was punishment. Now she saw it differently. Losing everything didn't destroy her. It rerouted her. If she had stayed in that world, the judgment, the pressure, the cold expectations, she would have lost herself slowly, quietly. But God turned her heartbreak into a pathway, a new life, a new partner, a family built on faith, not fear. Twins who filled every empty corner of her heart. Julie whispered, "Thank you for knowing what I didn't." Her reflection wasn't regret, it was gratitude. She didn't get back the life she once begged for. She got something far better, the life she was meant to live. Julie stepped outside that night, feeling the cool air brush against her skin. She looked up at the quiet sky, her heart calm and strong. She had a message she wished someone had told her years ago, a message she now lived every day. Every setback is a setup for a comeback. If you hold on to faith. Her story wasn't about loss. It wasn't about judgment. It wasn't even about revenge. Her story was about redemption, patience, community, and grace. She became proof that when life breaks you down, God doesn't leave you in pieces. He rebuilds you with stronger foundations, deeper love, and blessings you never imagined. Julie smiled at the stars. Her past was behind her. Her peace was permanent. Her future was bright. Bestie, if you believe God can rewrite any story, comment "Faith wins" below.